I had no aspirations that my life was going to be any different than my dad. We just didn't talk about it. We didn't think about it. I figured I'd work at the factory. I was a rebel from the time I was out running around on my own, which was probably started about 11, but seriously about 15, 16, being out till I wanted to come home and drinking and smoking and chasing just the pretty girls. Mm-hmm. That was my life.
Welcome to the Daron Earlewine Podcast, where we awaken you to become who you were born to be. Here's your host, Daron Earlewine.
Welcome back to the Daron Earlewine Podcast. I'm your host, Daron Earlewine. This is kind of repetitive. It's my name. It's the logo. It's me. It's my voice. It's you and me. We're together. We're mowing the lawn today. Maybe we're on the treadmill. Maybe you're driving. I don't know. I'm just glad to be in your ears today and hanging out. Thank you so much for downloading this episode. It's episode 55 right here on the Daron Earlewine Podcast, where we remind you of three things every single week. We remind you that God's near you, not far from you. We remind you that God is for you, not against you. And we remind you that God has created you on purpose and for a purpose. And today's guest created me on purpose and for a purpose. It's my father, not my heavenly father, my earthly father, my dad, Dave Earlewine, on the podcast today. And I wanted my dad to come on because it was one of those things where it's like, when you think you've done something, but then you haven't done something. I'm like, well, I know my dad's been on the podcast before. And then I was like, wait a second. No, he hasn't. And I love talking to my dad about his journey and his story because what you begin to realize, and maybe you're at a place where you're having kids, maybe you're dreaming about having kids, maybe you haven't yet, is you start realizing how much as a parent, how much your life and how much your story is impacting your kids' lives. And sometimes you don't realize that until you stop and think about how the decisions, how the risks, how the failures and successes of your parents' life created the culture that you grew up in. And there's some great stuff that I love that you're going to hear in this episode. And I'm honored to have my dad on the podcast. Hope you enjoy this episode. And if there's a phrase, okay, that I love in parenting, and I see it in as I've been parented from my parents and the way that I parent my kids. It's a quote that I don't know if it's original with him, but it was shared to me first by a great friend of mine, Matt Leroy, who's been on the podcast. His dad said to me one time, he said, you know what, Daron, more is caught than is taught in parenting. And I remember my wife and I were sitting in their living room in North Carolina, and he said that to me, and it stuck with me, and it has, because I realized that I can teach all my kids all the right stuff, and we can sit down and have all these lessons where I teach them this and I teach them this and I teach them this. But the bottom line is if what I teach isn't what I live, they're going to catch something different than the just lessons that I live, than I've taught them. I can have a lot of the right words and here's this and this and this, but if they don't know, if they don't see, if they don't experience that dad doesn't just think those things, but he lives those things, they will not live those things because they'll see them as hypocrisy. They'll see them as fake. They'll see them that my dad doesn't actually believe those things because he doesn't live it. They're going to catch the culture of the life that I create more than they're going to go home with the lessons and things that I teach them. And so I love that, and you're going to hear that with the conversation with my dad. And I would say this, that here's what I've caught from my dad. I've caught a continual growth process with the Lord. That you don't get stuck somewhere and it's like, well, this is the way I was when I was 26. This is the way I am when I'm 46. This is the way God is. This is the way I was, taught about God when I was young. And this I'm not even revisiting. What I've seen in my dad is a continual growth in his understanding and love and connection with God. Up to 71 years now. I've also caught that we walk with faith and trust in God. That we actually have faith and we trust him. And the last thing is this, that I've learned and I've caught from my dad, faithfulness. And you're going to hear these stories. And I just wonder for right now, as you get in, as you hear me talk to my dad, if you're thinking about your dad, or you're thinking about you being a parent, or you're thinking about the kind of culture you want to create someday when Lord, when you become one, I want you thinking about, what are people catching from your life? The scripture that I thought was interesting, and then we'll jump into the interview, is in Proverbs 22:6, right? We hear that passage gets thrown around a lot, right? Train up a child in the way they should go, and they're old, they will not depart from it. I love the way that the Passion Translation, how it says it. It says this: dedicate your children to God and point them in the way they should go, and the values they've learned from you will be with them for life. And one thing I love about this is I took a look at one of the little footnotes, and it says that this could also say, train them in the direction they are best suited for. And that some Jewish scholars actually feel like that this means that your child's talents, right? That understanding your child's talents, and then seeing them move towards that field is one of the ways that you train them up. And I love that image of it, that that could be translated that way, of seeing the gifts and abilities in your kids and then nurturing them and growing them in that space. And you're going to hear about that as I talk to my dad about the ways that he affirmed and gave opportunity for the gifting that we had. Some of the stories we didn't even tell, as I'm thinking about even this is when I came to sense like I was being called to ministry. I remember my dad allowing me to preach in his church at 16, and taking me to inviting me to come to board meetings from the church, which were freaking boring. But I was learning that, right? Taking me to district conference and having people like John Maxwell pray for me and lay hands on me and pray for my ministry and vision in my life. As he began to see the gifts and abilities that God placed in me, he made sure he affirmed those. He made sure he made space for those. He made sure that he invested in those. And I'll be forever indebted to my dad in the way that he poured into me in that way. And he taught me that, and I caught that from him. And I think there's a portion of that that makes me pour into you to discover the unique ways that God's created you and to move into it. And as we do, I pray that I continually model what my dad poured into me, that I continually grow in my understanding and love of who God is, that I actually walk in faith and trust in how he's guiding and leading me, and then I'm faithful to the end. Let's jump in. Here's my conversation with my dad, Dave Earlewine. It's a fun one. It's a personal one. I appreciate you downloading. I appreciate you subscribing and being a part of the Daron Earlewine community. Enjoy this conversation. I'll talk to you a little bit when we get done. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Daron Earlewine Podcast. And I'm very, very stoked to sit down today with the person in my life who has known me the absolute longest of anyone, welcoming my dad, Dave Earlewine, to the podcast. What's up, Dad?
This is good.
Hey, just pretend like it's old school and you're
You
preaching.
should talk for a living, but
I know.
this is different.
No, it's just you and me talking.
Okay.
You're going to do fine. It's going to be good. Dad, I asked you to come on the podcast for a lot of reasons. One, because I want to have these moments where we can have these conversations and I can just watch them forever, and my boys can watch them forever, and we just kind of have these moments. But also because I think here on the podcast every week I tell people that God's created them on purpose and for a purpose. And so much of understanding how we step into God's purpose for our life, we have to go back and really look at the beginning parts of our life. And so I want to have you on to talk about kind of the beginning parts of my life and our kind of family culture and how we understand stepping into God's call and stuff like that. Because I realize the longer I look back that so much of your life, you set the track, the foundation for the life that I've stepped into. So I'm stoked for the conversation. I know you're uncomfortable, but thanks for coming on the podcast.
I just hope I can remember the past. You can fill in anything.
Anything you forget?
Yeah.
All right. We'll see what we can do. So fill in the blanks a little bit. I gave you a little bit, but say something about who Dave Earlewine is, about like just, you're still married, you got kids, all the, the main, the regular vitals we give.
Yes, I am still married. 50 years, November 23rd 21st or 27th.
The 7th?
I always say the 21st, and then I get corrected by your mother. But
For 50 years.
But I've been committed for the 50 years.
Yes.
So, yeah. Life is good. God is good. I wish I would have had the relationship 25 years ago or 30 years ago that I sense as I take my quiet time and as I pursue every day.
Yeah. The connection with the Lord, you mean. And that's one thing that I loved. We're going to get into that because it's one thing that I've loved watching you and Mom is some people follow Christ and then it's kind of like they have a set of beliefs. They put God in a box and it's like they never revisit the box. That's just the way it's going to be. And what's been really fun to walk with you and Mom is that I would say probably, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, somewhere in there, we all kind of as a family, some of it chosen, some of it we were invited to. I was invited to
Find another vocation
to find it. Well, not another denomination, we'll say.
Yeah.
But we've walked through some reshaping of our thoughts on God that's led us to a really, really great place of understanding that we really do live loved, and we didn't know that. I don't think early on, and that's where I want to go with you. Because one thing that's interesting about your story, Dan, I want you to talk about it, is growing up, faith really wasn't a part of the Earlewine family, was it?
No, not really. My grandmother, Nellie Earlewine, was influential in a small country church.
Okay.
And when we were little, my brother and my sister and I, we always went, if we were in the area.
With her?
We spent a lot of time, weekends and things, at her house. We always went to church.
That had been like what, when you were like 8, 9, 10, or even younger
No,
than that?
younger than that.
Okay. And that's Nellie is grandpa's mom.
Yep.
Okay. What about Grandma Bush, which would have been your mom's mom?
She didn't really have a church background.
Okay.
So
as a young child, you and Uncle Charlie, Aunt Sandy, you guys would go to church as little kids.
Yeah,
But
not every Sunday, but
often.
yeah.
But with Grandma and Grandpa, that wasn't really their mix.
No, not at all.
Would you say they were just like it wasn't on the radar, or was it even kind of seen as a negative thing? Like, what was the tenor of the home around the idea of God or spiritual things?
I don't think they felt like that it was important.
Okay.
You know, they didn't run around with particularly religious people. Their friends weren't religious. I don't know if their friends went to church, but it just wasn't something we ever talked about at the house. Never, there wasn't any dining room conversations about religion at all.
Right.
My grandmother, Nellie, was a solid Christian lady.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that she influenced my dad that, the things of God were important.
Right.
But as far as I know, he didn't really
Pick up on him.
Yeah.
So that's the context spiritually. Grandpa he had a couple of different jobs, but he worked in the oil fields for a while, right?
For a long time.
Okay.
We lived on an oil lease. And so he worked with the oil pipes, pump jack things, and got really dirty every day. And I was so proud of him. I always liked to see him come home. He had to get undressed in the garage
Because he was so dirty.
Yeah, and just really oily, and but he was a man's man.
Yeah.
And he was tough.
I remember one of the pictures I have tons of pictures of my grandpa, but I remember one time I was in college and you guys had moved back here to Indiana, and we had to build a fence for our boxers. And I remember Damon and I were sleeping till it wasn't that late. I mean, maybe we were only sleeping till 8 or something. You came and woke us up because you were like, listen, your grandpa's been out there working for an hour. And he was probably 70 something.
Yeah, he was in his 70s.
And I remember waking up and grandpa's in these green coveralls out banging like iron rebar into the ground. And I thought to myself, that man can work.
He loved his boxer grand dogs too.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. So Grandpa's a man's man, and he's working in the oil rigs. You're seeing that, man, that's, a man is hardworking and gets his hands dirty. And so you had that influence. But as a kid, if you think back to, from maybe birth to maybe, 15, 16 years old, did you have any dreams, aspirations of like, I'm going to grow up one day and fill in the blank?
I can't honestly say I did. I knew I was probably going to end up where the rest of my family ended up, was, working at L.S. Heath and Son, making candy bars, or Victor Dana and making, stamping out engine gaskets. That was about the only careers that were in that area.
Yeah.
And everybody that I knew worked in the factories in Robinson.
So we're from Oblong, Illinois, or Robinson, Oblong, Olney, that area of southeastern Illinois. So small town. We're talking about what, 1,200 people maybe?
In Oblong?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there probably wasn't a lot. So what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say, is there wasn't a lot of talk about like, let's dream up a different future. It was kind of like you did what everybody else did.
No. My dad he loved farming. And so different times, even when he was working the oil lease, he would do a little farming. And at one point he purchased a farm, and we moved from the oil lease to the farm, and he farmed for a few years and went broke and went to the factory.
So as you grow up, then you start growing into, your teenage years or whatever. And at that point, faith or God not on the equation even then, as you're starting to grow into young adulthood.
No.
What was on the agenda for most weekends, or just in Dave Earlewine's life coming through like the high school years?
Am I supposed to be honest?
Yeah, it helps.
Because, Grandma Retha's going to listen to this. I know.
Hey, these things have been forgiven.
Okay. Well, I married her.
That's
her best daughter.
Yeah,
so.
that's true.
I had no aspirations that my life was going to be any different than my dad. We just didn't talk about it. We didn't think about it. I figured I'd work at the factory. I was a rebel from the time I was out running around on my own, which was probably started about 11, but seriously about 15, 16, being out till I wanted to come home, and drinking and smoking and chasing just the pretty girls. Mm-hmm. That was my life.
And at that point, we can get to the story. Grandma, Grandpa had a significant life change later in life, and even Grandpa did even earlier than that. But at that point, you saw a lot of drinking. I mean, just like that. That's kind of what you saw at home in some ways,
right? My dad was an alcoholic, drank every day, worked really hard, drank really hard.
Right.
That was the lifestyle that I was raised in.
So that's kind of your imagination. We talk often on the podcast about just a deficit of imagination. It's not that people wouldn't do a different life, right? Or they just don't really conceive that there could be something different.
Right, that's all you know.
Yeah. So that's what you know. You start down that track, and then I think maybe the next waypoint would be Vietnam happens.
Yeah.
And at this point, you think, you know what? If I don't have a future here, or what kind of inspired you to say, you know what, I'm going to go enlist. I'm going to go be a Marine.
Probably 12 cans of beer. Because back at that time, all through my high school, I was drinking anytime I wanted to. I was running around with guys that were 25. I was getting served in bars when I was 16. Nobody carded me because of the rough crowd that I ran around with. So weekends were drinking a lot with my buddies, and one weekend we were out and we were talking about we ought to enlist in the Marine Corps. And so we agreed, And it's one of the few things I followed through on. Yeah, we went and enlisted, and we both went to Vietnam.
So I'm guessing that kind of fit the script, though, right? Kind of a manly man thing to do. Let's go fight. Let's go defend the country.
Yeah.
So immediately from there, right, you go from like, I've been in Oblong, Illinois, to boom, I'm in San Diego. I'm on a boat. I'm on a ship. I'm all over the world.
Yeah.
What was that like? I mean, that's a huge question.
It was awesome.
Yeah. I mean,
a whole world that I didn't know existed. I mean, I've watched the war movies on TV, and the amphibious landing crafts from the big ships that I saw on TV. I was there doing that.
Yeah.
It was awesome. And then just the camaraderie, the feeling like you matter, you're making a difference, you're part of a team.
Yeah.
That you're trusting your life with. And so it was an awesome experience for this little kid from Oblong.
Yeah. So you're there, you do the Marine Corps, you do Vietnam, you come back, and I'm sure there's, we could tell stories and stories about that whole thing, but you come back, and now you've been to war. You're what, probably 19, 20 years old now? Mm-hmm. You come back to Oblong, and what's the dream? What's the vision? What's the agenda now?
Well, there was this pretty blonde lady that I wrote letters to when I was in Vietnam.
Why didn't you just email her?
Yeah. We had lead pencils and
how long did it take you to get
paper?
Do you know how long it took you to get letters from Oblong to Vietnam?
Probably a week.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it wasn't that long before you could communicate.
No. And so I started writing this girl, and lo and behold, she sent me a picture, her high school graduation picture, and I was hooked.
That became the agenda.
This woman wants anything to do with me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was your mother.
Yes.
Where else was the question going?
Well, so you come back. That's the agenda. I'm going to come back, and I'm going to find some way to marry Debbie Spall.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah.
And it worked out.
It did. Surprisingly, she said yes, and I think we dated about a year after we got back, and then we got married.
But what's interesting is that this is until like a couple of years ago I started asking bigger questions, to you and Mom, and just kind of tracing down her history. What's crazy to me is, I guess, for me growing up, Mom's side of the family was always like, Grandma Retha and Grandma, they were all like, I just kind of assumed everybody was Christians growing up.
Yeah.
But the crazy part is, you guys got married. Mom wasn't a believer. Neither were you. And if I'm right, like even Grandma Retha, was Grandma Sylvia even a Christian at that point?
Oh yeah,
she was. But Grandma Retha really wasn't. It had a strong.
I'm not sure what the timeline is on that, but the Spall side were all Christian faith-based people.
Okay.
By and large, whether they went to church every Sunday or not,
they had a faith.
Most of them did.
Okay.
Yeah.
But for Mom, that wasn't necessarily a major guiding force of her life.
It would be an awesome interview if she was here.
She could fill in. We'll have Mom on. That'll be next season.
She'll never show up here. No, it's. I don't really know what her timeline was, but she was always making better decisions than I was.
Okay.
And that had to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But then shortly after you guys get married, that starts to become a much more serious part of her life.
Well, we had a radical preacher who had an influence on your life.
Yeah.
Willard Metz, who he had a heart for God, and he pursued people. I used to think of it as kind of a holy boldness, where he really cared whether you came to know the Lord or not.
Yeah.
It wasn't, hey, can you come to my church and, drop $50 in the offering? No, right. we want you to know what knowing Christ is about.
Yeah. And so I remember the story you told me. I mean, you can tell it, but Mom starts going to church, and then finally you show up for like a Wednesday night or something like that, right?
Yeah, probably threw my cigarette out at the door, and I'm not sure on the timeline there, but the pastor just continually showed up, was just pursued me on the street, walking down the street. You know, he would stop, say, "Dave, how you doing?" Sorry.
Okay.
I don't think I ever had anybody care about me like that. Powerful.
Yeah.
Jen can edit all this, right?
No, we're not. This is the good stuff. We got to keep all this. So he starts pursuing. He starts showing a genuine concern and love for you, and that begins to make a major difference.
Oh yeah, he would invite us to his house, cook out on the grill, and he always talked about Jesus. Always talked about what Christ meant to him. Always gave a testimony that was convincing. But I'd never been around anybody like him. I mean, he had a lot of downsides.
Sure.
But he was willing to take a risk.
Yeah.
And he got a lot of people in the kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you remember, I don't know this story. The only story I can remember you telling me was that you had showed up one Wednesday night or something, and you were sitting in the back, and he said, "Dave Earlewine, you're here for a reason. What do you have to say for yourself?"
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I can fill in any details. I could make some stuff up. Nobody would know, but I know that, I don't know what the time frame was, but there was I think that incident, I stood up and I said something like, well, I know that God is real and he's working in my life. Mm-hmm. Something like that.
Yeah.
And then I sat down. Do you want the conversion experience?
Yeah, tell me that. Absolutely. I don't remember that.
What if I don't remember it?
Well,
it's been a long time ago.
No, like I said, no one will know.
I was sitting there, and about every Sunday, the way I remember it, there was a pretty significant God moment where people were moved and felt like they needed to. Back then, there was altars.
Yeah.
And people would, get up, even when he was preaching or when people were singing a lot, and they'd go up and kneel and pray around the altar. And I remember on the time that I yielded my life to Christ was at that one of those moments where it just felt like there was something drawing me to be public, and I went to the altar and prayed to receive Christ, and my life was changed. He actually accepted me.
Wow. Was it pretty immediate life change for you? Because at that point you said, not that now growing up at that point in that place where we would have thought that, smoking and drinking were definitely things you couldn't do and be a Christian. But obviously some of that were symptoms of what was going on in your heart. But as far as anything in your life, was it kind of a slow fade into faith, or at that moment in the connection to Pastor Metz and then obviously Christ, was it a pretty immediate life change?
Well, this would, your mother would probably be in a better position to answer that.
Sure.
Because she had to live with me. But I feel like it was that was a significant moment, and my life changed from then on.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I didn't smoke again or,
Sure.
but there was definitely a tug on my heart to seek after Christ. And I think that first 6 months or year was a significant spiritual growth change in my life.
After you came to faith, did Pastor Metz, did he like disciple you, meet with you regularly, or go through the Word, or was it just more like what was going on at church?
Your mother and I got involved right away, and we started working with the youth group, and we started, having lessons with the youth group. So it was kind of a on-the-job training kind of thing. And
right.
in my memory, Pastor Metz knew I wasn't perfect.
Yeah.
But he knew that something had happened in my heart.
Yeah.
So he trusted us, to do things.
Yeah.
To, in a sense, represent Christ.
Yeah.
And that was pretty amazing.
To see that, to pursue you like you said he did, you know what I mean? To invite you to see you, to lead you to Christ, but then to see potential in you, and then give you ability, give you authority, give you ability to lead. What was Grandma and Grandpa's take? Because obviously they weren't Christians, and now here's their son who was, a hellraiser in town and wrecking cars and getting in fights and whatever, and all of a sudden he's going to be a Christian. Was it like, oh, you're going to be a weird Bible thumper? Or were they just kind of, that's cool for you? Or what was the vibe with Grandma and Grandpa?
I don't think. I know my dad didn't say anything. I think they were just kind of watching to see how long this would, will this last?
Okay. But it wasn't a negative vibe.
Wasn't a negative. They didn't, in any way shame us or anything. But it was, I'm sure they were watching.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there actually anything in this Christianity deal?
Right.
This relationship with Christ. Can it actually change people?
So it starts changing you, and you start serving in the church. Now at this point you're working with your sister's husband, my Uncle Dave. You're working with him on the farm, right? Probably somewhere around there.
I don't know what the time frame. We lived in Robinson. I worked at a gas station as a mechanic. That was after, high school, going to vocational school to be a mechanic, auto mechanic, and then working in that field after I got back from Vietnam. Well, I actually worked in Vietnam as a mechanic part of the time, more of a oil change, fix a flat tire kind of thing. We didn't break any engines or anything down, but so I'd had a background in mechanics and working with my hands, and so my brother-in-law's dad had a heart attack one night in his living room and died. And after the funeral and things settled down a little bit, my sister Sandy and her husband David needed help, and so they gave us a little house out on the farm and invited us to come out there. It was the best. Probably it's kind of hard to rate them, but it was kind of a sanctuary.
Was that like something you thought, this is going to be great? I'm going to be a farmer now. This is the deal. I'll just be here on the farm, and we'll raise a family out here on the farm, and it'll be good days.
I don't know whether I had much long focus other than this is what we're doing now, and I absolutely loved it. It was probably 4 or 5 of the best years of my life. Working, making a good living, being in the country, having dogs. That was a good life.
So it's a good life. You're cruising along. You're growing your relationship with Jesus. You got a wife. You got a son, because Damon was born out there, and I think actually I was maybe like 1 when we were out there. So you're growing a family. You're growing crops. Things are good, and then God kind of interrupts the story.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a major change of calling.
there was about, 3 to 4 or 5 years period where God was really moving on that little congregation, and he was stirring people to respond to a call to ministry, which I was just beginning to learn what that was all about. So there were 3 or 4 that ended up leaving there and going off to pursue going to Indiana Wesleyan, Marion College back at that time.
I'm sure you can't remember, like, maybe you can't, like, specific sermons by Pastor Metz, but I'm assuming that was probably a big part of what he was challenging people to come to Christ, but then saying, hey, get involved. You know, I mean, he had to be sowing that kind of vision into the congregation, wouldn't he?
He was a good preacher, solid biblical preacher, but his interpersonal life, his interaction with everyone, was spot on. I mean, he made you feel like he cared about how you were doing spiritually, how, he wanted to hear stories about what God was doing in your life. And he initiated those conversations, which caused us to, oh yeah, well, this happened.
Yeah.
So there was kind of a movement of, young people that were sensing a call to ministry and going off and pursuing college.
So there's a movement happening around you. You're out in the tractor one day. Take us there.
Oh, okay. Well, farming, you get to spend a lot of time by yourself.
Yeah.
And
this is before tractors had like GPSs and drove themselves, and probably nice air conditioners and sound systems.
Our tractors that we use all the time did have cabs and air conditioning.
Okay.
Which was really nice. So, during this period of time, God's really working in my life, and I'm aware, oh wait, there's 3 or 4 other young people that just left, to go to college to study for the ministry.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't sure what God was doing, but I was feeling stirred, and I knew me really well. Mm-hmm. And to think about going to college and reading and studying and doing things like that
seemed a little beyond.
I'd rather just dig a hole or repair the fence or something.
Right.
So I kind of wrestled with it because I felt like, I don't know if there were audible words, but I felt really impressed that God was calling me in that direction. And I kind of, I don't know if I resisted, but I was really cautious.
Took a minute to maybe believe it.
I didn't want to, oh, Dave, you're going to go too?
Gotcha. Yeah.
Well, we'll get in line.
Right.
So,
do you remember any conversations coming home talking to mom, being like, hey, I think maybe God's calling me to be a pastor?
Well, we had them. I don't think I can remember them.
Right.
But your mother is a remarkable person. I wish I could put her on a copy machine and make copies and pass them out so that everybody could have the same experience. Why do you do this to me?
It's not me. I'm just asking questions. You're the one crying.
She's very supportive. Whatever I wanted to do, she kind of had my back, whatever you think.
Yeah.
So we went.
Yeah.
Do you remember the went?
Yeah. I mean, at my earliest life memories are riding my big wheel around the maintenance shed of at Indiana Wesleyan, Marion College at that point, because you went there to go to study for ministry, but then you had a job in the maintenance or something.
Yeah. there were several confirmations that accompanied the call.
All right, let's talk about that.
There were resources, financial resources that were made available. We went to Indiana Wesleyan, Marion College back at that time, walked into where you register, whatever that.
Admissions.
Yeah, admissions. And it was taking a little bit of time, and so I excused myself. We weren't in a meeting. We were just waiting in line, and went to the restroom in the Teeter Hall.
Yeah.
And there was a missionary and another guy that were in there, and they were talking, and I was listening. And the missionary said, "We're getting ready to go back to the mission field, and I've got this 4-bedroom, 3-bath house, on a half-acre land that I don't want to just walk. I just don't want to leave town.
Right.
I need somebody to, find somebody to rent that." And boy, that got my attention. And so I engaged them in conversation because I'm really shy.
Right. Yeah.
So I said, I hear your conversation. I'm here to register for fall semester, and I have a wife and 2 kids, and I need someplace to live. I would really take care of your home. Well, he rented it to us way under the, and stuff like that. So I went in and told your mother, "Hey, this missionary in there just rented us a house." So talking with the admissions people, they wanted to know a little bit about my background. I said, "Well, I have some mechanic experience." And they go, "Well, we actually need a mechanic at the motor pool." Well, they paid me, I think I had to work 15 or 20 hours a week.
Okay.
And I was responsible for maintaining. They had a nice garage, and there was a fleet of maxi vans and trucks and all the lawn equipment, and I was responsible for keeping that all running. It's probably the second best job I ever had.
So you show up, you leave your small town, you pursue what you feel like is a sense of call in your life. You show up to Indiana Wesleyan, and within moments of being there, you have a place to live for your whole family. You have a job that's going to provide means and probably some kind of financial assistance to the whole deal, and boom.
6 hours free of schooling.
See, what I love about it, and it's cool to hear this part of the story, because it's like, I think about, and this one reason I wanted to have you on, Dad, is because it's like, I think it's so important for parents to tell the story of God's faithfulness to their family, because I think about, like, I've heard some of these stories. I don't remember that one, but I just know that so much of the way that you responded to God's call in your life, and the way that you continued to say yes to the places that he was leading you, and the way that he showed up, like, that's hardwired into my DNA, my spiritual DNA, of like this draw for adventure, this draw to go on a podcast and tell people every time you're created on purpose and for a purpose. And like, when you step into that, like, God actually begins to stack the deck in your favor. Like he confirms that step by step. And usually it's in super practical ways. Like, you need a house, you know what I mean? You can't just live in a dorm. You got kids, right? Yep. You need a job. Oh, by the way, yes, you know how to fix cars. Here's an opportunity. It's like, he shows up, and he showed up for you, and you stepped into that. And like, those are, like I said, those are some of my first memories of life, of being there at Indiana Wesleyan. And like I said, I remember that house. I remember you taking the snow blower, and you'd blow the snow off and like blow it against the windows. And Damon and I thought it was hilarious. Yeah. And I can just remember little snapshots of that season. So let's keep moving. So you go there, God confirms that. You go for 2 years because you already had your associates. You graduate, and you go to a church in Wyanett, Illinois.
Yeah.
So as I was thinking about this week to talk to you, like, in my brain, like, with as a kid, right? It's like, your parents are always grown up. Like, they know what they're doing because they're your parents. But like, I'm thinking about it, you've not been a Christian for more than probably 7 years.
Yeah, probably.
Grew up in a completely non-Christian home.
Maybe 5.
You've been a Christian for 5 years. Now you have a degree, and they're sending you to a town and be like, okay, now you're Pastor Dave.
Yeah.
like I've been Pastor Daron before, and I remember being Pastor Daron as a mid-20s, because you probably were in your late 20s at that point?
Yeah, probably 27.
Were you thinking like, what the freak am I doing? Are they really going to let me be a pastor? Or was it just like naivety of being a 20-something being like, yeah, let's do it. Here we go.
Well, I'd like to say that I had total confidence in God's provision because I had just been called and showed up and got a house and a job and actually graduated from college.
Yeah. So you're riding some pretty good momentum at that point.
Yeah. So next step, we're going to take a church.
Yeah.
Okay, God.
Yeah, here we go.
Let's go do this.
Yeah.
And we did. And there were some really good moments.
Yeah.
There were some really tough moments. I don't want to go there.
So did you have very many mentors in that to kind of help you figure that out when you went to Wyanett? I mean, I know there's the district stuff and whatever, but I mean, did you kind of feel on an island, or did you feel like there were some guys that came around you, people that kind of helped in that process?
You know what? As I look back on it, and it's been a long time ago, I think there was the pastors of the Northern Illinois district did get together, have teaching times together,
leadership development stuff.
Yeah. And then there was church camp and youth camp, every year.
Yeah. I remember that.
And then that denomination put on pastor
development stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had that. So we're there for 4 years as a family, and then there's a major shift. And I don't know that I know the whole story here, but so you've been in Oblong. You did a little bit in Vietnam. You come back. I'm happy. I'm going to have a farm. This is the deal.
Yeah.
Oh, nope, God, you've called me to ministry. Now we're going to college. Now we go pastor for 4 years. Then I don't know what led up to it. I just remember the day you came home and set Damon and I down, and you had books with wild animals, wildlife of
Scorpions.
The Southwest, which was the dumbest thing you guys ever did. Hey, guess what? We're moving to this state called Arizona. You've never heard of Arizona. You have no idea where it's on the map. But here are the wild animals you'll get to incorporate: Gila monsters, scorpions, rattlesnakes.
Check your shoes every morning before putting them on.
I swear, I thought I was going to die from some poisonous
Well, now, was
reptile.
that you? I mean, was that me, or was that your mother?
I don't know who had the
Beating
book.
that drum.
I remember you guys set us down and you gave us a book of animals of the Southwest.
Okay.
If you feel called to some job in the Southwest, if you're watching the podcast, don't get your kids a book about wildlife of the Southwest.
Go to the Southwest.
Yeah, but to go to the Southwest, no doubt about it. We should go now. So what happened? How in the world did you get the idea that, you know what, next adventure, we're moving halfway across the country?
Well, your mom and I had talked and prayed. We've been here 4 years. Things are going okay, but we're not doing great. The church seems to still be supportive, but we went to a pastor and wife conference, and we went every year. It was kind of a revival kind of thing.
Yeah.
And one year we volunteered to be the Red Jackets, your mother and I. And that meant we served the delegation of the different districts of that denomination. We would get them water, and we would get them snacks, and we would give them paper. If there was something they were voting on in the business meeting, we would collect, So we kind of did that deal.
Okay.
Well, we got assigned to serve the California, I think it was California, Arizona, maybe, district.
Okay.
So the denominational leaders that were assigned to that district or that state, we served their tables. And the district superintendent, Steve Babby, wonderful, Steve and Barb, they were just really super nice to us that weekend or week, however long it was. And we sort of stayed in contact after that, and some of the other, because there was probably 7 or 8 pastors and the district superintendent and his
Okay.
wife from that district.
Okay.
And so we interacted with them when there was breaks and things, and we really felt drawn to them. So we wanted to go to California.
Okay.
You could have been raised in California.
Lord Jesus, that would have been awesome. Well, in
So
Arizona's
at that time, we contacted the district superintendent in California, and he said, Dave, love to have you out here. He said, but I don't have any churches open right now. He said, have you contacted Arizona? And I said, yeah, I sent him a resume and I didn't get any response. And he goes, well, give me a couple of days. So he contacted the district superintendent in Phoenix and said, hey, I've got this couple that I met. They're young. I think they would help you. You got any churches open? Well, as a result of Steve Babby's having the conversation with the Arizona district superintendent, they invited us to come to Safford, Arizona.
Yeah.
And so we ended up in Arizona because there wasn't any openings in California. And Safford was a small, struggling church that had potential, but it had some issues.
Yeah.
And I love them to this day. But that was a rocky road for us.
Well, the move was a rocky road. I mean, we packed everything up. The truck broke down twice. You and Grandpa had to unload the entire U-Haul, whatever, on the side of the highway and reload another truck.
That was a wonderful experience.
So when you're packing everything, I remember, this is funny. You probably remember this, but at that point there was who was it? Michael W. Smith had a song called "Friends Are Friends Forever," and I remember getting in the U-Haul, whatever, to leave Wyanett, and I remember playing. I had a flair for the dramatic, must have back then. I created my own moment. I put on "Friends Are Friends Forever" as we drove out of Wyanett, and I waved to my friends, my only friends that I remember having up into second grade, and it was, hey, friends are friends forever if the Lord's the Lord of them. And we actually reconnected through Facebook with some of those friends later on in life. But as we're rolling out of town, I'm listening to Michael W. Smith crying because we're leaving all my friends. Yep. But now you're probably a 30-something-year-old guy with a growing family, and now you're moving to an area of the country you have no idea. Was it still like a sense of adventure? Was it essentially a feeling of just continue, no, God's got us. He's led us this far. We're just going to continue to step into what he has for us?
My experience doesn't have to be like anybody else's, but my experience through this whole spiritual journey is you get impressions. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're your own.
Sure.
But the way I look at it is you let her pursue some of those. Mm-hmm. And if it works out, there's at least a lesson for you to learn. I was a Marine in boot camp in San Diego.
Yeah.
I knew what that part of the world looks like.
Yeah.
I liked that a lot. Well, we didn't go to San Diego. We went to, Safford, Arizona, and then Phoenix. But, and then the connection with the district superintendent. So, I guess we were young and I could say, full of faith, but probably silly enough to just pursue, to respond and follow and see what happened.
Yeah.
So I don't know where I went with that question, but
well, no, I love it. And I know so much. Like I said, so much of that has been, has. I mean, if you look at, my brother Damon, our lives, we both have not shied away from adventure and moving to different parts of the country and knowing, you know what, we'll figure it out. Got to guide and direct us in this, and he has. And I think a ton of that is because the way we grew up and the way that you and Mom responded to the gentle nudges that you felt like were God's leading. So we end up in Phoenix, or end up in Tempe actually for a long time. We're at a church, and
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
And I can just remember, some people have the story, and we took this church, and we took it we had 50 people, and before we knew it, we had 8,000 people come to our church.
That wasn't my story.
You didn't have that story. No. But one thing that you always did, and one thing that I always admired is, like, you know, you did your best to learn, to grow, to develop. And I can remember growing up, and you were always learning from, you know, leadership tapes and John Maxwell, and you were a phenomenal preacher. Like, I credit a lot of my ability to speak now from what I learned from you and watching and growing under your leadership and your, you know, the way you were dynamic and speaking and stuff. And so we always had those elements, and like we were pushing some of the envelopes. Like, I love the fact that, like, way before anybody in the Midwest was doing it, like we were doing, you know, live drums and guitar and worship and stuff. And a lot of people didn't love that. But for you, we never grew to the point where you had tons of people and tons of money. And you, for that whole time, you had to work bivocationally. What kind of, like, I guess what kind of kept you going to persevere, to knowing that, you know what, we're kind of grinding this out. I'm kind of having to create, you know, kind of a portfolio life. I've got a little bit of this, I do a little bit of this. But was it just like, what motivated the perseverance in that?
Short answer, love for people.
Yeah.
Life was hard, but I found, I searched for something to keep my heart tender. Because there's hurting people. You know, they say, you probably said this, you know, hurting people hurt. You know, they hurt people. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to, you know, find opportunities to, you know, go sit with somebody. One of my real passions has always been death and dying and hospitals and nursing homes and that whole piece. I got a lot of personal fulfillment, you know, by praying with somebody and holding their hand and watching them go into eternity. I guess that maybe sounds weird.
No, I think it sounds super pastoral. One thing, Dad, that you dealt with, and any, you know, any pastor could probably say they do, is there was a lot of church crap and a lot of attack and hurting people that hurt people. And a lot of times, you know, it's not that great to be the center of everybody's attention as the pastor, because you get hurt.
Yeah.
As I look back, I don't remember. I don't have memories of you and Mom pulling that stuff home and bashing church people, or like, we grew up in some pretty, I mean, they were pretty dysfunctional small churches, but I didn't grow up hating the church. Was that a conversation that you and Mom would have of, like, we're not going to come home and air all that out in front of the boys? Was that a decision you made, or was it just wisdom?
It's probably your mother's idea. You know, because she has always been my right hand. Mm-hmm. I mean, she helped me so much behind the scenes. She didn't want any credit, but it wouldn't surprise me, and I don't remember, wouldn't surprise me that she would say to me, well, we're not going to, you know, we're not talking about this at the dinner table.
Yeah.
We're not.
Yeah.
I don't remember. Maybe it was by accident. Probably not.
Probably not. There was enough.
Probably the Holy Spirit nudged to.
Yeah. Because you guys didn't. And I'm appreciative of that, because I know it was happening. I know how easy it is to bring that home, and you guys didn't. And I think one of the things that I appreciate you guys did, and I want you to talk about this, is because, you know, you didn't grow a huge, massive, you know, mega church or something. But one thing you did super well, I feel like, is maintain a great family, where, you know, I hear pastors' kids all the time, well, it was just tough because, you know, my dad was like this on stage, and then this is the way it was at home. And, like, I don't have that story. Like, I always felt like you and Mom were exactly who you were at church, or exactly where you were at home. And one thing you guys did early on for Damon and I is you noticed and celebrated the gifts and abilities that we had. I mean, in 6th grade, you bought me an actual drum set, which what parent wants kids playing drums at 6th grade? Maybe you knew that I could practice at the church, but...
Yeah, we had second thoughts on that about a weekend, but no, we didn't.
But what I guess, is that just something that just happened naturally? Or, but you and Mom did that from the get-go. Maybe it is a natural parenting thing, but you didn't make us have to be like a what the church wanted us to be or whatever. You saw it and you celebrated our gifts and abilities. What influenced you to do that?
Well, I don't know, Daron. I've always been a giver, so you find out what somebody needs or maybe what somebody would like, and you meet that need, and then God provides resources to do something else.
Yeah.
I don't mean to say that and that was all me, but I have always been a giver. It gives me great joy to give. The cool thing was we had an empty church building, that there weren't too many activities, several nights a week. And so it was a perfect place. You guys weren't running the streets. You were over there making music and probably upsetting the neighbors, but
probably
nobody seemed to complain.
Yeah.
So
one of the things I noticed, you encourage those gifts, but one of the things I think is difficult, and they're kind of shifting gears into kind of a parenting side of things now, but like you were bivocational. You sometimes work in 2-3 jobs, and I thought it was, very wise. I mean, I remember forever you did, you did funerals for people that didn't have, a church home. It was a great way to make money, but the bigger part was you were able to love those people in a unique way to you, and we were able to minister to as a church to many of those people. So you were always doing stuff. But one thing for me is like, I can't remember you missing anything. Maybe you did, but like I can remember you sometimes sitting up in this, in the stands at even a baseball practice or a band practice, and maybe you were reading a book or studying for a sermon, but like, Mom worked a 9 to 5 always, and you had flexibility in trying to balance all that. But like, you did a good job with like work-life balance, and that you were always around. Do you feel like, was that like a decision you made, trying to maybe change the way you grew up, or kind of what influenced that idea to be like, no, I'm going to be there?
I don't know. Probably nudge from God, but we weren't financially able to, buy you the newest bicycle or, spend a lot of money on toys. But somehow I was impressed to be present with whatever you guys were doing. You were a big part of my life, and I wanted you to be supported. Impressed with the passion that both of you had for music, which was a piece of, I never got that.
Yeah.
And to see how much joy that it brought you to pursue your passions at that time. It encouraged me to be there and watch you. So I made it one of the advantages I had was, for much of the time that we lived in Arizona, I worked 11 to 7 at night at the juvenile detention center. So that was where I did my sermon prep. That was, I had to be awake, for 8 hours.
Yeah, right.
And again, I think that was another provision that God provided. So, sleep when you can, but you earn some money here, and then in the early evening or whatever, afternoon, whatever, have the flexible time to, support what you guys are doing.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And I think whether you're in ministry, whether there's a lot of people now, and I think, it's kind of a phrase now that's used of this idea of a portfolio life, but you live that where it's like, okay, I can work at night. I can, sleep when I can, but I can provide that. I can double dip that, do some sermon prep, get ready for stuff for the church, but then have myself, have a flexibility where that, and it's like, I haven't seen that until I start thinking about like even how my life has grown, of how much I think there's a ton of that I learned of like watching you, of like, yeah, you don't necessarily have to do it all the way that everyone else does. And I think that was a beautiful part of it. But let's fast forward. We got to land the plane here. But you stayed in ministry for 25 years. And then you guys came back here to Indiana. We were here. You partnered up with me, helped me at a church plant. We worked together at a large church. And now we're both at a place where we're no longer in traditional vocational ministry. And I think we've learned a lot more about God that we didn't know then. And so if you were to look back on the journey, like what do you know now about God and even about yourself that you wish maybe you could go back and coach and mentor like 28-year-old Dave Earlewine?
He rescued me, gave me provisions, protected me when the enemy was fighting. I guess, do your best and leave the rest. I think that's Maxwell, maybe. Probably everything I know is Maxwell.
Well, I don't know if you stole it from Maxwell or not, but you have probably said that phrase to me a million times.
Yeah.
And I probably say it to my boys, your grandsons, a million times. And it has continued to be true.
It's pretty good advice.
It is. I mean, just to do your best and then leave the rest, and you can obviously add on and leave the rest to God. Like, and I've seen that in your life. I've tried to model that in my own life. And you've done that, Dad. And one thing that I'm just so grateful for is I was just, a couple of weeks ago was at, my best friend, Brent, his mom's funeral. And they got up at the funeral and talked about on his mom's side that they trace back 400 years of Christian influence in that family tree, and just how that has continued to see. And it's a phrase that I borrow from Erwin McManus, who talks about redemption lift, that when Christ enters a family, that if you track that family from generation to generation, the way that redemption of that family just continues to be lifted as far as their impact on the world and even their social economic standing. And so it's like I was at that funeral thinking about, Brent's mom, and that they can look back and see 400 years. As I look at your life and Mom's life, and like you said, maybe your grandma, had some faith there, but like I'm just so grateful for the way that you and Mom continue to say yes to God, whether it was from the beginning of bringing faith as a core part of our family, or whether it was saying, I'm going to trust God and do my best and leave the rest and leave the farm and try this ministry thing. The whole process from, Illinois to India to Arizona and back, like you have woven that into our family unit. And I'm so glad to see, that my boys, are carrying on that legacy. And I'm excited to, maybe someday in heaven, look down 400 years from now and people be able to say that, that there's been 400 years of a legacy of faith. And a lot of that's going to go back to, the decisions that you and Mom made, to stay faithful and loyal to the Lord in the environment and the life that you have allowed me to be raised in. So thank you doesn't seem like enough thing to say, but thank you. And we're back. Oh, what a journey through my whole childhood, huh? I hope you enjoyed that. I know I did. Hey, thanks, Dad, for being on the podcast today and sharing that story with us. A couple quick thoughts I want to wrap up. I know this was a longer episode. My dad likes to talk. Surprise, surprise. I'm kind of like him. A couple of the principles I want to pull out is that when we move in faith, God moves in favor in our life. I didn't know some of the stories that my dad told me there about, when we moved to Marion and, he's got two small kids. He doesn't know what he's going to do. And all of a sudden, in a random conversation, he meets a missionary that has a house, and they need a mechanic. Like all these things that happen. And these are the moments when I tell you guys this all the time, right? That God is for us, not against us. And the reality about that process is when we move out in faith, is that God begins to move out in favor. And it truly is like the entire universe begins to conspire in our favor. The fact that God has stacked the deck in our favor, the fact that the scripture tells us that you have been created, right? You're the craftsmanship of God, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God has prepared in advance for you to do. So as you begin to advance, as you begin to move in faith and respond to the call of God on your life, he moves in favor and begins to open up doors for you. And I love the way my dad talked about how seeing God show up and continue to prove that he was for him and that he was actually bringing favor into his life. Even the favor and the forness of God in his life was what actually gave him momentum to take that next step of faith. And if you're there right now, go for it. I think it's interesting as I talk to my dad. I mean, sometimes, he's 71 years old, doesn't remember all the details. It was quite a few decades ago. But some of it, it wasn't like it was a huge planned out thing. Like I did this and I went and went this assessment of this. It's like it was an opportunity, relationship, door opened, gentle nudge of God. And I trusted that God would be faithful, and we went. And maybe you're overthinking it right now. Maybe you're overthinking it, and what you need to see and what you need to experience and your kids need to see is that you just step out in faith and see how the favor of God shows up. And here's the last thought I want to have when we'll be done with this episode, is that we can never underestimate our faith in God, our trust on God, and our faithfulness to God. It could never be underestimated. Because I think the reality about it is, as we look back on our life, is that's what it is. It's just a culmination of those little daily decisions of our faith in God, the fact that we're connected to him, that we're growing in it, and that we trust him, that we have a ruthless trust that he will show up. He will be who he says he is. He is for me. He is near me. I trust that. And then just staying faithful. Not staying perfect, staying faithful to your marriage, staying faithful to your parenting, staying faithful to your commitments, to your job, to your calling. I don't have a story of that my dad was amazingly successful. We didn't sit there and talk about, man, that was great, Dad. That one, then you sold the company for $100 million and we got that boat in Florida, right? We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of huge earthly success. What I have seen in my life, here's what I caught from my dad: faith, trust, and faithfulness. And I'll forever be grateful for that. And it has laid the foundation for me to never stop in my pursuit and my connection, my faith in God and who he is. It's given me everything I've needed to trust God that, you know what, I don't know how this is going to work out. I think this maybe is what God's doing. And for me, whether it's starting a ministry in bars or it's starting a radio talk show, even though I've never done radio and it's going to be on a secular station, whether it's the process of writing a book, DNA, that everything that I do, it's because I caught from my dad that, you know what, I'm going to trust God that if I take this leap of faith, he's going to begin to bring favor into my life, and he has. And then what I hope I'm learning and what I hope my kids are catching from me, like I caught from my dad, is that I'm faithful, that I'm there, I'm loyal, I'm not going anywhere. I can guarantee you my kids have picked up, like I did from my dad, I'm not perfect. I'm not flawless. But by God's grace, I'm faithful. I hope that encourages you, friend. Take a look at the life that you're creating. What are people catching from you? And I hope when you get done, they'll catch that you lived with a strength and a confidence and tenacity, that God was near you, not far from you, that God was for you, not against you, and that God created you on purpose and for a purpose. You were faithful to that. You chased after it. and you lived a great adventure. Thanks for journeying with us again, guys. I appreciate it. Love to hear from you. Maybe hear about your story a little bit. You can reach out to me. Email me, Daron@blackbirdmission.com. You can text me, 317-550-5070. Or reach out to me through any of the social medias. Hey, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel or Spotify or Apple, please do. As the subscriptions grows, the ability to reach more people with the podcast and this message grows, and it means the world to me if you do that. And if you need a little jump start to your purpose, head over to IamBornToBe.com today, and I'll send you the 5-day free jump start to purpose and 5 quick devotionals that will help you get a jump start to become who you're born to be. You can get that at IamBornToBe.com. God bless you. I love you. And we'll talk to you guys next week right here on the Daron Earlewine Podcast.